Hey there,
Well,
Colin.
hello there, Jen Wilner. Hello, everyone. I'm Bonnie Low-Kramen. I'm back in my home office in Ponte Vedra, Florida, after 2 weeks of running around the East Coast. And I'm happy to report that we quarantined ahead of time and we were very socially distant. And I'm pretty sure everybody's healthy. So welcome, Jen. Where are you today?
Joining everybody from my home office in Edison, New Jersey.
Fabulous. And it was Jen and I had a socially distanced lunch. It was great seeing you in person. It had been too long, right?
Way too long. Way too long.
So today we're going to be talking about mental health. It is such an important subject that has been coming up it was certainly coming up before the pandemic, but since March, there's been a lot of talk of anxiety and stress and worry, and people are getting sick and people are losing their jobs. And so for very good reason, mental health is front of mind because we're in this unprecedented situation. And you've heard me say it before, I'm a big fan of therapy and finding help when you need help. For me, I wanted to be productive, so I, watched Broadway shows. I wanted to, use this time at home wisely. Jen, what did you do to help keep yourself sane these last few months, which is still going on?
Yeah, a lot more early morning exercise, like kind of hardcore. I took some notes from our daughter Alexis on her exercise regime, but it really makes a difference in how you start your day.
How early were we talking about?
Oh, almost Bonnie o'clock. So getting up at like 5 and almost not needing an alarm clock, which is a wonderful thing.
Good. And so how many miles do you do, or you do steps?
Yeah, we're tracking steps. So I'm very happy if I get to 10,000 in a day.
Wow.
Very happy, but it's really about how you feel. And it really helps with the clarity and your mental focus during the course of the day, I find.
Well, I'm delighted that you have an outlet and you have your husband at home. And, what we're hearing from all over the world are assistants who were suddenly working from home and home alone, maybe with a pet, maybe not. And so it was loneliness and fear. And all of these things made us bring mental health into the conversation, but it also encouraged me to think, you know what, I think we need to talk about this on Facebook Live and to bring in an expert. And so Jen helped me find Dr. Bianchi. She is from Rockville, Maryland. She's been a clinical psychologist for at least 12 years. Let me read you something about Kristen. We spoke last week, and I was really taken with her depth of knowledge about mental health. And, I'm a big believer in bring in the experts if you need help, right? And we bring in professional assistants, we bring in professional doctors. So let me tell you a little bit about Kristen. She practices at the Center for Anxiety and Behavioral Change in Rockville, Maryland. She has extensive experience treating anxiety disorders and depression in adults and adolescents. Additional clinical specialties include OCD, excoriation disorder, and trauma-related disorders. Trauma is a word that can absolutely be applied to what's going on these days. Dr. Bianchi has a special interest in the roles of disgust, shame, guilt, and embarrassment in the disorders that she treats. You can follow her on Twitter at Bianchi Kristen, and Jen will be putting up her information, but it's Bianchi, Bianchi, and then Kristen, Kristin. So, when I was speaking with Kristen, she shared that, OCD is an expertise. And it made me laugh because I think that a lot of assistants see themselves as borderline OCD and that detail orientation. So let us welcome Dr. Kristen Bianchi, please.
Hi.
Hey there.
So much for having me,
Maryland. Isn't this a miracle that we can do this?
It absolutely is. It is a delight and very cool to know that we have guests with us today who may be from all over. I'm very excited to talk about
coming in and out and telling us where they're from. But and we're recording this, so we do post it on social media. So let me ask you, Kristen, since the pandemic hit, people were suddenly forced to work at home, and we're in this unprecedented time. What has been your experience as a clinical psychologist? What are you seeing and hearing, and what in the world can we do about it?
Well, we have never been busier in our field. And so
as in never been busier.
Not in my career. Whereas ordinarily in the summertime, we'll often see a little bit of a dip in requests for services because people go on vacation, kids go to camp. People's moods tend to lift a little bit naturally as the days shorten, and sometimes they'll scale back a little bit on therapy in the summer. Such was not the case this summer. And so I would say that there may have been a 2-week lag between our going virtual and people adjusting to that. And then we have just been inundated since then with requests for services. So what that tells us is that people are struggling more with mental health challenges. It also tells us that people are more willing to ask for help now that they are finding themselves suffering in different ways. Because my primary area of specialty is really anxiety, and while I am going to group OCD alongside anxiety for today's purposes, even though if we were to take out our diagnostic manual, OCD is in its own category and has its own family. But really, originally it was considered to be an anxiety disorder, and we know that there is a lot of anxiety associated with it. And what we see with anxiety, ultimately what lies at the heart of it, and what lies at the heart of obsessive compulsive disorder as well, is uncertainty. We know that people who tend to feel anxious, who are chronic worriers, who fear particular outcomes, maybe it's particular types of social interactions, maybe it's financial ruin, maybe it's just being abandoned in a relationship. But what we see is that uncertainty is particularly uncomfortable for people who struggle with anxiety. And so they would be having a tough time with everyday types of uncertainty anyway. Well, I'll throw in a pandemic, this new virus against which our bodies have no native immunity. There is no cure. There is no vaccine. There is no end in sight. And while we understand many of the routes of transmission, we are understanding that better and better. We don't understand why certain people get infected, why others don't. We don't understand the long-term. We don't know what's going to happen long-term to people who survived it. So we're faced with all of this increased uncertainty that really does have a genuine life or death quality to it. While most people who get COVID-19 are not going to die from it, many do. And again, not knowing who will and who won't. And hearing stories about, people who were otherwise healthy perishing, we're all really scared. So take people who were already on edge and feeling worried, and take those as well who may have struggled with obsessive compulsive disorder, which, contrary to kind of what pop culture has us believing is not solely centered upon germs and contamination and cleanliness. It's actually a very heterogeneous disorder that centers upon a number of different themes, contamination and illness being just one. But, for people who already had that as part of their set of worries, or who had health anxiety as something with which they were struggling, now you throw in an objective risk, and this has really thrown them for a loop. This is, for many people, it's been kind of like their worst nightmare. And so, with that, we have certainly seen an uptick in requests for services. What we're also seeing is that people having to work from home, and I think that this would most certainly apply for executive assistants, are having to do the same tasks in a home setting that they would have to do in an office, but they don't have access to their workspace and the types of ongoing encounters with executives or other support staff or just other staff members that could typically happen in person. And it could be, a matter of just popping your head in someone's office or running into them in the hall, aren't available to them. So now you all are probably having to schedule calls or have your phones on hand for text messages or group chats, whatever it may be. You probably have tons of them running at any given point in time. But those little in-person communications can't happen. They have to be scheduled into a different format, which then makes you even more, we might say, hypervigilant or extra attentive to your screens, to your phones, if you use Blackberries, iPads, all of the things, all of the electronics. Now you're having to double and triple check all of those on top of your email. And that's a big deal when you think about all of the checking, all of the the anxious responses that might be getting triggered in an ongoing way all day long. Each time you check your email, each time you are waiting for a call, waiting for a text, whereas in a standard work environment, again, you could have maybe just walked down the hall and found the person with whom you wanted to speak.
So a lot of assistants are reporting amazing fatigue, extreme fatigue.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily because they're working crazy hours, but others are not only reporting fatigue, they're reporting that they are putting in crazy hours because the boundaries, like they're sleeping at work, there's no separation. No. What's your advice for some of these ideas, some of these problems?
A few things. My first piece of advice would be to carve out a space that you use solely for work and to set it up in such a way that you have access to whatever supplies you need. Again, even if you're working with limited space, it might just mean momentarily converting the same space. So setting up, maybe it's a table with particular supplies, with your screens, etc. But at a starting work at a particular time of day in that space, and as best you can, trying to hold those boundaries of whatever hours there are. Whichever hours you work, whatever schedule you would typically keep. But we do want to clearly demarcate where it is that we're working, when we start, and then when we finish. And so if you are working at home, if you have a home office, then at the end of your day, again, whenever that might be, we'd have you physically leave that space. If you are kind of doing what I'm doing, which is operating from a very fancy couch office, then at the end of the day, I'm going to change what's around me, and turn this into my regular couch and not my office. But there are going to be certain things that I do that signal to me that I'm off the clock. I'm not going to open my computer screen again once I'm finished with my last patient of the day. I am not going to look at my iPad again. And if I'm using my phone, it's going to be just for fun stuff like fantasy football. I do have a draft this year.
Let me ask you this. People are really coming up close and personal with their own mortality. It just doesn't get much realer than this. What do you recommend for those people who are really consumed with worry? Some that are rational and some that for good reason. What would you recommend? And we're getting our visitors here. Welcome everyone. So what would you recommend for these more serious types of worries?
So a couple of things. The first piece is something that we call radical acceptance. And I did not develop this term. It's drawn from dialectical behavior therapy, which is a wonderful form of therapy that's helpful for many things.
It's radical
acceptance. Right. So what that means, it means exactly as it sounds. But what that means is basically saying, this is what is outside of my control, and I commit to accepting that. And again, we can say, oh yeah, I get it. I can't control this, but it's an ongoing commitment to really saying, this is outside my control. This is what is within, this is what I can do. And so this is what I can directly control. This is what's within my sphere of influence. So I might have a little sway in terms of the outcome. And this is what is completely outside of the realm of what I might be able to do. Right. And while recognizing that does mean accepting difficult realities, it also means that we don't have to constantly fight with them. There is a liberating element to it. It's kind of like when you've finished a test, let's say, an exam, and it's out of your control. Now it's up to the professor or what have you. But basically saying, okay, here's what I can do, here's what I can't do, and how do I make the best of my life amidst all of this uncertainty?
Yeah, so, interesting. Yeah. A lot of assistants we've heard are trying to focus to take action on behaviors of things they can control, like organizing every closet and drawer in their house, or cleaning everything within an inch of its life. It's interesting how we choose to control the things we can control in order to kind of stay sane with the things we can't. Jen, you had a question from Izzy, right? That a lot of parents are working from home and have kids attending school virtually. Yeah. What do they do, Kristen? How do you set the boundaries? How do you help them? Kids are frightened too. What do you think? What do you say to the parents?
This is really hard. And it just so happens that Maryland public schools just started this week. Actually, a lot of private schools did as well. So parents are 3 days in. So this is very timely. I guess my first thought is that it's going to take some practice, and this is going to be an ongoing challenge. So it's going to probably take some experimentation in order to figure out, okay, what boundaries can I set? How do I hold firm and consistent? So I think first it's figuring out where are the limits? What are your parameters in terms of your own resources? Where are there certain non-negotiables? Some of the boundaries are probably going to be set around your child's school day, but also around your work day. And how do you set time for yourself doing something, whatever that might be, even if it's just work, and remaining lovingly firm, which is going to mean at times kids are going to be disappointed because they're not going to have your attention in the way that they want, even though you're right there physically. And I know that, I hear parents whose, hearts are breaking. So, on the one hand, they're feeling brokenhearted because they're not able, their kids don't understand why they're not emotionally available, even though they're physically available. And simultaneously, they're exhausted and burnt out because their kids are still demanding attention, and they're trying to, oversee their child's education while holding down their own jobs. And so it's really difficult to set boundaries. I think, again, the more distinctions you can create in terms of demarcation, that you can create in terms of when you start your day, when you end your day, and in foregoing checking things like email, even social media. I don't know that it's doing us a ton of good right now, unless it's a truly invigorating way to keep in touch with people. I don't hear many people saying that it does that for them. I'll acknowledge that there might be some people for whom it does.
Yeah.
But if there's an opportunity to connect with someone socially, I might encourage that happen, with a socially distanced visit, or a virtual interaction, or a phone call, or something like that.
Regarding the whole parents and kids and homeschooling thing, and you're right. I mean, we're only a few days into this. I have teacher friends who say that if this virus comes back, we can all expect schools to start closing again in October or November. It's like, it's so up in the air. But it's super important to involve your executive and your coworkers about what is it that you're dealing with at home. We now more than ever, I would think you'd agree with this, Kristen, that we need to involve the people in our orbit, the people at work, even if we're communicating with them only over Zoom. Can you talk about the whole loneliness factor?
Of course. So loneliness is an interesting concept, because when we think about it, we often associate it with solitude, and with being quite literally by oneself, on one's own. But what we know is that while it is very possible to feel lonely when you are isolated and when you are by yourself, it's just as possible to feel lonely when you are surrounded by people. Because it may be that you don't have anyone who's mirroring how it is that you're feeling, who's responding to your emotions, who's tending to your needs and engaging with you in a way that makes you feel seen and heard. So sometimes people feel lonelier when they are in a group or in a household than they might if they were completely on their own. Simultaneously, there are many people who are living alone who are really hurting a lot too. And so in saying that, in no way am I dismissing. It's just as profound. It's a different kind of pain. But ultimately, it does come from this universal place of not feeling seen, heard, understood, appreciated, validated, and connected.
People can have a lot of health problems from that, not only mental health, but have you seen physical problems as well with your clients?
Loneliness, yes, actually, we have a lot of concerns about long-term negative health sequela of loneliness, and doctors are just trying to make sense of that. What I see more commonly is depression evolving out of loneliness. And with that, there is a physical component to depression. So, and for many people, when they have depression, it manifests a little bit more physically. So we might see just general malaise, just not feeling well, but not having any clear-cut medical reason for that. That's been identified. We might see frequent headaches. We might see muscle tension. We might see GI distress, so stomach aches, diarrhea, sometimes vomiting. We might see changes in appetite, so increased appetite or diminished appetite, fatigue, and disrupted sleep, which could mean insomnia, so having a hard time falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up sooner than you wanted to. Mm-hmm. We also see what's called hypersomnia, so sleeping too much. And, so that's another sleep issue that can be a symptom of depression.
So, Kristen, we've got assistants who are signing in from all over the world, and please add your questions for Dr. Kristen Bianchi. We'll talk for a few more minutes and then take lots and lots of questions. We're going to have a hard stop at 4:00 Eastern time. I asked Kristen if she would stay for the full hour so that we could deal with all of this. Kristen, when somebody is super lonely or having issues, you're doing sessions over Zoom. Can you talk through how that works? And is it are you getting good results with that? Is that because isn't it amazing how many things are possible over Zoom?
Yes, definitely.
And therapy is one of them.
Yes, yes. There's lots of therapy happening right now, which is, again, a good thing. What I've actually found is that there's been a surprising intimacy to working with people, even though it's through a screen. They are in their homes and I'm in mine. And there's an intimacy to that. So they're seeing a little bit more of my humanity than they would maybe in the office. Not that I am one of those sort of closed off therapists who won't tell you anything about herself. But for example, my cats Zoom bomb my appointments routinely. And what are you going to do? If somebody has tips for training cats, do email me. But I think that there's something to be said for being able to kind of be in one another's spaces, albeit through a screen, and in sharing this ongoing stress, right? So we're going through it too. And while in a therapy session, we're certainly not going to be talking with you about, how much this is getting us down, that wouldn't be appropriate. There is a certain camaraderie that can be shared in terms of just, certain frustrations, just kind of validating those everyday, the new inconveniences that have arisen, being able to model that, we're not probably going to, I don't think any of us in life, with all of the stressors that we have on us right now, it's not fair for us to grade ourselves using metrics that applied pre-COVID. We're not working under the same conditions. Right. It's like, it would be like trying to run a race, but you've got this heavy backpack on right now. You can't compare your new time in the race to what it was before you had to put the backpack on. You're carrying around a whole bunch more weight. And so instead, we want to say, to acknowledge, oh my gosh, what you're carrying is really heavy. The fact that you're still running is remarkable. And how do we keep you, how do we help you run? How do we help you walk? Maybe, who said we have to run? Let's just help you carry this load, and let's acknowledge that we're all in this together. I work with a lot of pathological perfectionism. And so I see people who are really beating themselves up because they're not able to maybe juggle as well as they did all of the responsibilities and projects that they did prior to all of this. And again, to use one example, that the county in which I live, during the fourth quarter, they made grades just pass or fail. And there was a reason for that. And that was because it wasn't fair to try to evaluate students when their whole learning setting had changed, when teachers, hadn't yet been familiarized with how to teach through Zoom. There was no infrastructure for it. How are you going to grade these kids on, different standardized tests or even regular quizzes when, the tests wouldn't have been a valid measure of what they had learned. So letter grades wouldn't have been valid. And in that same way, we have to embrace that same spirit for ourselves and recognize, look, we've got to show one another grace and compassion, but my gosh, we have to show that to ourselves. And I know that there's so much pressure on executive assistants. I mean, that the level of detail and the pace at which tasks are expected to be completed, and executive assistants are required to absorb a lot of stress, many demands, and fluctuations in mood of executives, right? And so you're probably—
they're stressed out too. The executives are stressed out.
And stress is not going to bring out the best in anyone. I don't know too many people who are terribly congenial, when they're under a great deal of
People
stress.
handle stress and anxiety in different ways, don't they?
Do. Yes, they do.
Is there some kind of, I don't know, measurement, or do you have a shortcut as a therapist? How do you tell? What are some good telltale ways to know if someone is really about to lose their stuff?
Gosh, I think it depends on how we're going to define losing it, because you've got some people who explode, and in those instances, we would see kind of your standard escalations in anger signs, snippiness, abruptness, terseness. We see that fuse shortening in a way that is almost palpable, and so that might be our signal. We've got other people who tend to turn inward. And so if we see increased withdrawal, and more, I guess what I would call a greater increase in non-behaviors.
So what does the assistant do if they have one of those non-engagers? We've heard that a lot, where there are, the executive just goes radio silent, disappears. Do you have some advice there?
So, all we can do is reach out in the way that feels most comfortable. We can't force someone onto a radar, right? I mean, when someone's withdrawn, it's like trying to get a snail to come out of its shell. But what you might do is voice, maybe contact that person in a less formal way, and just say, hey, I was thinking about you. This reminded me of you. How are you doing today? So I learned this recently, and I love it. I love the idea of asking, how are you doing today? Because I think when we ask, how are you doing, it invites, it can invite what feels like a threatening conversation. Someone might feel as though they have to make themselves more vulnerable by saying how they're doing on average. But if you say, how are you doing today? That allows for them to maybe make a little bit of a personal disclosure, because maybe they're having a crappy day, and they can say, well, today is really hard, or what have you, or maybe they're having a good day, but at least it allows for a little bit greater likelihood of engagement. So I think really just small gestures like that.
I love that. I love that. And I think assistants need to know that they have a right to, that there is, it's completely legitimate to want to reach out to not only your executive, but to peers, and just to say, hey, how are you today? I've been thinking about you, that kind of thing. Jen, could you put up Elizabeth's question again? And there we go. Can you see that, Kristen?
Yes. Having your partner not understanding how you feel, even though you were telling them. This is so tough. And we are, seeing.
We brought you in for the tough question.
No, it's a wonderful question. I'm so glad that you asked. So, I believe that you can't communicate too much. And I think even though, if we're talking about a live-in partner, even though, you might be technically like on top of one another, and living under the same roof, sharing the same space, that doesn't mean that communication is happening. And in fact, I'm seeing decreases in communication. I'm seeing a lot more happening in the way of cold shoulders and silent treatments. And so, I think, again, this is an instance in which we may not be able to control. In fact, we can't control how our partner is going to hear what it is that we say, or how our partner is going to react. But we can control how we communicate what it is that we want, whether or not we communicate what it is that we want, stating what it is that we need in a way that's assertive, which means standing up for our rights without violating anybody else's. That's the basic definition of it. And typically what we recommend when giving feedback or asking someone to change their behavior, to do something differently, is to give feedback that's based on an action. Mm-hmm. So when you said blank, it made me feel hurt, ignored, invalidated. So you're not making a broad character generalization. You're just simply saying, when you said, I'm bored, in the middle of my telling you about my day, it hurt my feelings. It made me feel invalidated.
Right.
And then having an opportunity to maybe process that, see how your partner responds, but then asking for what you would like for that individual to do differently. So, next time we talk about this, I'd like you to make eye contact with me. I'd like you to sit down here next to me. Mm-hmm. I'd like for you to turn off the television and look at me. I'd like for us to look at one another. So the more specific we can make our behavioral requests, right, the more likely we are to be heard, and the better we can disarm some of that automatic defensiveness. Because, let's be honest, none of us loves to get negative feedback. But when it feels as though we're being given feedback on a behavior, that feels more doable in terms of change than having somebody tell us, yeah, your attitude really sucks. Well, what does that mean exactly? Right. Pardon my language. but that's so broad-based. Or using terms like always and never. Well, you never do this, or you always, you always shut down when you're upset. Well, that might be true, and it might be that a person does frequently close off and withdraw, but what exactly does it mean? The more specific we can be, right, the more helpful it is in terms of assisting our partner in doing something different the next time. And it can cut down that likelihood, yes, of having them feel as though they're being attacked, or making them feel bad because you're not saying anything about their character. You're simply saying this action hurt my feelings,
Yeah.
right?
And this all happened so fast. So now
Yeah.
all of a sudden, people who were not around each other for
Mhm.
many hours per day, all of a sudden
Right.
are in each other's space, and sometimes really small space for, it's a lot of new,
Yes.
not to mention the worries. And so it is useful to ask each other, I have a few things I'm worried about that I'd like to think about. Could we talk about it after dinner tonight? Like, set a time to do it, and then say, what's bugging you? What's worrying you? One other point because the questions are now and comments are coming in fast and furious. So Jen, be ready. A lot of assistants were sharing that they're just running out of time. We all get 24 hours in a day, and they're just like cooking and cleaning and being responsible for running the house and doing work and being a partner to a spouse. It just feels overwhelming. And one of the things that has been coming up is to bring in even if you have small kids, to bring people into the issue, to bring people into the problem, to kind of just have a family meeting, to it's a new day. So maybe we start delegating some new tasks. I'm feeling really tired. I think I need to start giving over setting the table to somebody else. And, maybe once a week you can cook, and some new rules.
Yes.
Kristen, are you seeing that happening? Some like new negotiations going on?
Yes, certainly. I think that is a great idea. Where I think I see people struggling is coming up with new ways to reward, we would say, desired behavior or good behavior, or following instructions. I'm speaking in part to kids because they're at home and there's not as much, they have access to some of their screens or the things we would ordinarily use to say, okay, you get 20 minutes, extra to play this game, or to watch. You get to watch one more, 15-minute video on YouTube or something. Kids kind of are a little bit saturated with that. So as our partners, if you were to think about, what would be rewarding, well, maybe we could do a date night, or we could go see a movie, or these activities are
watch one on Netflix.
Right. And
choose it tonight, and I'll choose it tomorrow.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what we recommend. So you get to choose the next show we watch, or you get to choose the next series. I had a couple doing that, actually, and that was a novelty. So trying to find ways to weave in novelty. You get to pick what we have for dinner, or you get to pick a dessert that we can make together, or we set aside time and we take a walk outside. There are lots of different possibilities.
I think that's true, and it just is. We have to look at it in a new way. And you're getting so much positive feedback, Kristen. I really appreciate it. Nora's writing in from Hawaii. And she's thanking you. So Jen, maybe you want to put up Lynn's comment. She's living alone. Kristen, can you see that?
Uh-huh.
Her anxiety skyrockets.
I might be carrying the virus back and forth. Relieving anxiety.
Oh boy.
Okay. So, again, I think this is an instance in which we have to figure out, okay, what's within your control. So what can you do? What are the actions that you can take? What is outside of your control? And with anxiety, what we know is that when our fight or flight response is activated, in a lot of ways, a lot of what's happening is very similar to what is going on when we're exercising. So let's say you were taking a brisk walk or a little jog or whatever it is that you like to do, and your heart rate were up and you were breathing in a more shallow way, you wouldn't be worried about what you were feeling because you would know that it was because you were exerting yourself. I have been encouraging some type of exercise to manage new spikes in anxiety. I know that that sounds cliche, and I can sometimes sound like a broken record, and obviously I'm not a fitness expert. But if the engine is revving, we may as well take the car out for a drive because our fight or flight response is going off. So our body is already prepared to fight off
That's a great way to think about it.
Or to run out of a burning building. And so if we can do it, if we can, assuming that it's medically okay, if you can up the intensity, do like a little bit of rigorous exercise, again, check with your doctor first, that will also help to regulate our emotions, to put the brakes on that fight or flight response and to help us calm down, because as part of the cooling down process, it activates a different part of our nervous system than the one that is associated with the fight or flight response. So body movement, again, there are a lot of options for that, free YouTube videos. I would recommend something like that. If you have other social contacts outside of just your daughter, if there's any way to engage with them, just to have some more company to kind of offset that one relationships that you feel like your support network is a little wider. I would strongly recommend that too.
Yeah. There, in talking with so many people, the scope of mental health issues are really very broad, right? The spectrum is really high, but and the more serious ones, I mean, we talked on the phone, are you concerned about the risk factor of suicide and hurting yourself kind of thing? Kristen, can you talk about that?
Sure.
Is that real? Is that happening?
Yes, we are very, very worried about suicide. Particularly because more people are isolated. People have more time to research lethal means. If people are living alone, they may have access to lethal means. They may not have people checking in on them. There's, people may be surrounding themselves with other people who are similarly depressed. Sometimes that can have a contagion impact. And then we have, concerns about overdoses, whether those are accidental or intentional.
Self-medicating, right?
And just general self-medication, which tends to lower inhibitions, which for someone who has suicidal ideation is it places them at higher risk.
So, my reason for bringing it up is that everybody needs some extra help sometime. And so I would hope that everyone who's listening right now, if you're working, that you have medical benefits that will enable you to seek help. And, we still have time to answer some questions, but Kristen has a practice and she is open for business, and Jen is going to be supplying her email address because, and she's saying that therapy is happening over Zoom. I'm a big fan of therapy. I think that this situation is calling for professional help sometimes. And, Dr. Bianchi said that some insurances are covered with her practice, some are not, but she was telling me prices, they're not that much money. So it's, this is important. Your mental health is so important. So I hope, you'll check out your medical plans and see what it offers. I guess on a short term, some antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications are called for, Kristen?
I think it doesn't hurt to check in with a psychiatrist or a primary care physician. Sometimes they can be kind of your first responders with regard to anxiety and depression. What we know about cognitive behavior therapy, which is the type of therapy that I practice, that we practice at the center at which I work, is that we can affect the same outcomes of medication. And what we see with therapy is that it gives you more tools.
Without medication, without pills.
Without medication, correct. Now, again, for many people, medication is a vital part of care. And so often, many of my patients are prescribed medication by a psychiatrist, and they're doing therapy with me, and that combination works very well for them. So I'm for all sorts of possibilities, but I would encourage seeking out therapy where possible. Employee assistance programs often can recommend providers in the area, and I think we'll sometimes cover sessions for employees. I think it depends on where you work.
Right. And Kristen was telling me that if you contact her and it's not in her wheelhouse, it's not, whatever it is that's the issue, that she's happy to refer you on. The main thing is that we need to come out of this crisis whole, and
definitely
strong. The demands on the workplace are not getting any less pressing.
Sure.
So we need to be as strong as possible. However we choose to deal with this the mental challenges through there. Jen, do we have another question or comment? While Jen is pulling something up, I want to just say that Robert, who Robert Sanders, he gifted me this book, and it is blowing my mind. I mean, some people read, some people watch movies, some people listen to music. I mean, all those things are outlets, but this happens to be, it's nonfiction. Mm-hmm. It's called Caste. Have you heard of it?
I haven't.
Yeah, it was on Oprah's book club. Not that I use that as my benchmark, but it is Isabel Wilkerson, who is a Pulitzer Prize winner. I'm almost done. It is astonishing. It's about race relations in the world. Mm-hmm. Certainly a stress and anxiety producing subject, but it also has relatability to the stratifications, the hierarchies, the power structures that exist in the workplace, which is directly applicable to the group we have on the call today. And, assistants are famous for knowing that if we understand a problem, if we shine a light on it and we kind of examine it closely, then we have a much better shot of solving it. Mm-hmm. And, what I see is that, we've got some months to go with this pandemic. They're working on a vaccine, and that there's just so much we don't know. My purpose in asking you onto Facebook Live today, Kristen, and through all of the things we're doing, is to provide ammunition for our staff of our workplace to be as fully informed as possible, so that you can sleep and feel strong and be energetic to do the work you want to do, to have the life you want to have, to enjoy your daughters and sons and grandkids and all of that.
Sure.
So your contact information is in the chat. Kristen, do you have some other ideas that came to mind that you want to share?
In terms of
anything.
Well, one thing that I actually, a little tool that I like to recommend to people, given that, given that our thoughts are being pulled in so many different directions, and we are probably getting carried away on the tides of our own thoughts, is to use our five senses to bring us back into the present. And to do that, we do something called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. And what that means is we find 5 things that we can see, 4 things that we can touch, 3 things that we can hear, 2 things that we can smell, and 1 thing that we can taste. And what this does is it forces us, one, to take notice of what's around us. So it helps us step away temporarily from the train of thoughts that might be spiraling out of control, or from the intense emotions that might have taken hold. By putting into language what it is that we're seeing, touching, hearing, smelling, and tasting, what that does is it forces us to use the more evolved part of our brains, which helps us, what's called our frontal lobe. So the part of our brains that really helps us, that distinguishes us from other species in our ability to reason, to problem solve, to organize, plan, make decisions, all of it. It's kind of like our motherboard. But simply by putting into language, even if it's just in our head, it forces us to use, again, what's called our frontal lobe. And that overrides the more primitive part of our brains, which elicits the emotional response. We call that our reptilian brain, and it keeps us alive. And so it's important. And so that's why it can be very difficult to concentrate when we're really angry or when we're really scared. But because essentially that part of our brain sort of, when that part lights up or gets activated, so to speak, it kind of runs the show. But we can override it by doing an exercise. And again, that makes us use a different part of our brain. And it also helps us to notice the present, to center ourselves.
I think it's worth a try for sure.
Yeah, and you can play around with it. I mean, you can switch up the senses and identify, it doesn't have to necessarily be 5 or, you can switch it up according to where you are.
Well, I think that's a great way to conclude. Elizabeth is thanking us both. She needs to run. Thank you for being here, Elizabeth.
Thank you for coming.
As we conclude this session of Facebook Live, Jen Wilner, come on back. We want to thank you so much for helping us manage things from backstage. And Dr. Kristen Bianchi, we're very grateful for your expertise and your wisdom. It's just so important to go to the experts if you're having issues like this. And, there's been a stigma and feelings around seeking mental health.
Yeah. And
there shouldn't be.
Nope.
Because it's just kind of like having a broken leg or, anything else that's broken.
Right.
It's temporary, usually,
exactly.
and can be fixed. So I urge you all to check the chat and to connect with Dr. Kristen Bianchi if, in fact, you are needing some support for yourself or for a loved one, your child. Like I said, we want to come out of this whole and healthy and strong so that we can face whatever it is that's coming next. So I urge you to visit the brandy new website, betheultimateassistant.com. We'd love to have you subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is where Jen is going to post the recording from today. So if you found this to be useful, which I'm sure you at least got 1 or 2 things that you can use, I hope that you'll share the recording with others who could be helped by this information that Dr. Kristen Bianchi shared. So with that, I think we are finished for today. And I thank you for being here. I urge you to
Thank you
stay
for having me.
safe, wear a mask, plan to vote. Kristen, what were you going to say? Sorry.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really an honor to spend some time with all of you and all of the people who tuned in. Thank you.
Well, thanks again. Thank you,
Kristen.
Jen.
It was wonderful.
All right. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Stay sane.